Imagine you are deep in a forest where the trees blot out the sky, where the air smells of damp earth, rotting leaves, and lingering smoke from artillery shells. It is October 1918, and the First World War is dragging toward its bloody climax. The Argonne forest in northeastern France has become a labyrinth of mud, shattered trunks and trenches carved out like wounds in the earth. And inside this tangled nightmare, 550 American soldiers are about to vanish from the world's awareness for nearly a week. They are cut off, surrounded, and yet they will refuse to surrender. History will remember them as the Lost Battalion. Most people, when they hear of World War I, imagine endless trenches, a grim stalemate, men staring at the wire through the mist. But here, in the last months of 1918, things were shifting. The Allies were pressing hard, trying to push the German army back before winter could lock everything down again. Among those thrown into the offensive were the men of the 77th Division of the American Expeditionary Force, many of them New Yorkers, city boys from the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Manhattan, now wearing mud instead of suits and carrying rifles instead of briefcases or lunch pails. Their commander was Major Charles Whittlesey, a quiet, almost bookish lawyer in civilian life. He was not the kind of man who gave rousing speeches or charged with a saber raised high. Instead, he was deliberate, serious, and committed to his duty. His men respected him, though few would have called him charismatic. And yet, under his leadership, they would endure something no training manual could prepare them for. On the 2nd of October, the orders came down. The 77th Division was to advance into the Argonne, push through the German lines, and link up with French forces on their flank. It sounded straightforward on paper, but the forest swallowed armies. Communication wires were cut by shell fire almost as soon as they were laid. Messengers disappeared. Maps were outdated, roads destroyed. What was supposed to be a coordinated advance became a blind push through a maze. Whittlesey's battalion moved forward, deeper and deeper into the thickets. They crossed ravines, clambered over ridges, slick with rain, listening to the sound of their own boots squelching in the muck. Every so often, a burst of machine gun fire crackled ahead, or a shell whined down from the clouds. Still, they pressed on. They believed they were part of a larger movement, that friendly units were advancing on their left and right. In truth, the forest had swallowed them too. By the end of the day, Whittlesey's men found themselves alone in a pocket of the Argonne. The Germans had closed in behind them, cutting off their supply lines, severing their connection to the rest of the army. No food could reach them, no water but what they could scrape from muddy puddles, and no orders except the last one: hold your position. Now picture it. 550 men crouched in shallow pits and hasty trenches on a forested slope. The air is thick with the smell of pine sap and gunpowder. Their uniforms are already damp with rain and sweat. Some are chewing nervously on bits of tobacco or hard biscuit from their dwindling rations. Others glance back into the trees, half expecting to see reinforcements arrive at any moment, but no one comes. For the next 6 days they will be surrounded. The forest will echo with machine gun fire, the crash of mortars, the screams of the wounded. Messages will be scrawled on scraps of paper and tied to carrier pigeons, the only way to call for help. And one of those pigeons, a bird named Cher Ami, will become as much a hero of this story as any soldier in uniform. But before that moment of desperate hope, the battalion must endure hunger, thirst, and a rain of steel from every side. The Germans quickly realize this isolated pocket of Americans is cut off. They tighten the noose, pouring fire into the ravine where Whittlesey's men huddle. Hour after hour, the trees are splintered by bullets and shells, limbs fall like spears, bark flies like shrapnel. The men dig deeper into the earth, pressing themselves against it, as if the dirt itself could save them. The first night falls heavy and cold. Darkness in the forest is absolute, broken only by the flicker of artillery flashes on the horizon. Whittlesey moves among his men quietly, reminding them to stay low, to hold fast. He does not promise them relief, because he cannot. He simply tells them the truth. They must endure, and endure they do. When dawn comes, the battalion is still there, hungry, exhausted, and terrified, but alive. The first day inside the Argonne seemed at first like any other day of the offensive. The men were tired, yes, but they had advanced before. Orders came down through a chain of voices, some distorted by the stress of battle. Whittlesey's men were told to push forward, to seize the ravine ahead and to hold it until relieved. They believed they were part of something larger, an entire division pushing forward in step. But the forest had other ideas. The Argonne was no ordinary battleground. Its trees stood like pillars in a cathedral of shadows. The canopy was so thick that sunlight barely filtered through, turning the battlefield into a dim green twilight even at noon. Paths were little more than deer trails, narrow and twisting, impossible for heavy equipment. Sound carried strangely, bouncing between ridges, so that gunfire seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As the battalion pushed deeper, the sense of being alone began to creep in. No friendly bugles called to their left or right, no shouts of other American companies moving in parallel, only the whisper of leaves, the snap of twigs, and the sharp crack of German rifles that seemed to echo from every direction. By nightfall on October 2nd, they had reached the ravine. It was little more than a scar in the earth, sloping steeply downward, filled with mud, tangled roots, and the stench of rotting vegetation. The men set to digging foxholes where they could, scooping with their helmets, bayonets, even bare hands. They needed cover before the Germans found them. The first probing shots came just before midnight, sharp cracks from the ridge above, bullets smacking into tree trunks and showering bark. The men returned fire, flashes bursting in the darkness like fireflies of death. Then, silence. The forest swallowed the echoes. For a moment they thought maybe the enemy had pulled back, but dawn brought the truth. Machine guns raked their positions from above, hammering the ravine in short, precise bursts. Mortar shells crashed into the trees, exploding overhead and raining splinters. One man was cut down by a falling branch thicker than a man's arm, his skull smashed before he even realized he was under attack. By the end of the second day, they knew. They were surrounded. Food had already become an issue. The men had marched light, expecting resupply within hours. Each carried what the army called iron rations. A bit of hardtack, a tin of meat, maybe a few lumps of sugar. It was never meant to last more than a day or two. Some men shared what they had, others hoarded, nibbling crumbs like misers counting coins. By nightfall, hunger gnawed at every stomach. First was worse. Water bottles had been drained in the march. The only moisture came from small rivulets trickling down the ravine. Men dropped to their knees to drink, not caring that the water was brown with mud and stank faintly of decay. Some scooped it into helmets and passed it around, trying to pretend it was clean. Within hours, dysentery spread. Bellies cramped, bowels emptied uncontrollably, and the stench of sickness joined the reek of blood and gunpowder. Sleep was nearly impossible. The forest was alive with sounds, branches creaking, shells whistling, men crying out in pain or nightmares. Rats scuttled over the wounded, bold as if they knew no one had the strength to chase them off. Some soldiers tied rags around their legs at night, hoping to keep the vermin from biting. And yet, despite all this, the men clung to their rifles. They cleaned their weapons obsessively, wiping them down even when they had no rations left, as if the simple ritual could keep them sane. A few lit cigarettes in cupped hands, the glowing ember, tiny beacons in the dark. Others whispered home addresses to each other, making pacts. If I don't make it, write to my mother. Tell her I didn't suffer. Tell her I died quick. They knew it wasn't true, but the words mattered. On the second night, the Germans tried something new. Voices called from the darkness. English, spoken with heavy accents. Americans, surrender. You are surrounded. Lay down your rifles and you will live. For a moment, silence. Some of the younger soldiers glanced at Whittlesey. Would he answer? Would he consider it? But the major stood still, his face unreadable in the gloom. Then he turned away without a word. His silence was louder than any speech. And the men, though half of them were thinking of their empty stomachs and throats as dry as bone, tightened their grips on their rifles. They would not give in. That night, Whittlesey wrote in his notebook by the faint light of a shielded lantern. He did not record grand thoughts of honor or glory, only terse lines. Ammunition low, no rations, enemy in strength, hold position. It was the language of endurance, not triumph. By dawn of the third day, their ordeal had only just begun. By the third day, October 4th, the men were no longer soldiers in the ordinary sense. They were gaunt shapes, huddled in mud, eyes sunken with hunger, lips cracked from thirst. The forest no longer smelled of pine but of smoke, blood and decay. Every breath seemed heavy with gunpowder. Every gust of wind stirred the stench of rotting flesh. The ravine was alive with groans. Wounded men begged for water that didn't exist, for morphine that was long since gone, for mothers who would never come. Their comrades could only sit beside them, wiping brows with muddy hands, whispering lies of comfort. You'll be fine, help is coming, just hold on. But even those words were drying up. The Germans knew exactly where they were and poured fire into the ravine at intervals, never letting the men rest. Machine guns chattered from the ridges above. Snipers picked off anyone who dared raise his head. Mortars whistled down, exploding in blasts that shook the earth. trees shattered like matchsticks, shards of bark cut like knives. One explosion buried 3 men under dirt and splinters. Their comrades clawed them out with bleeding hands, but only one was still alive. And then came a new horror, their own artillery. High above, American gunners, blind to the truth, believed the ravine was in German hands. Shells shrieked down from their own lines, crashing into the very slope Whittlesey's men clung to. The ground heaved. Men were blown apart by the very army that was supposed to save them. Panic spread. Voices shouted through the smoke. "It's our own guns. They're killing us." Some men broke into sobs, not from fear of the Germans but from the cruel betrayal of their own side. They waved rifles, coats, anything, trying to signal through the trees, but the artillery kept coming. Whittlesey knew the only hope was a pigeon. He scrawled a message in pencil, his handwriting sharp and desperate. "We are along the road parallel to N176.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." He rolled the slip, shoved it into a metal capsule, and tied it to the leg of a pigeon named Cher Ami. Soldiers gathered around as he lifted the bird in his hands. She was small, grey-feathered, eyes bright, hardly the image of salvation, but in that moment, she carried the weight of 500 lives. Whittlesey tossed her into the air, wings beat the smoke. At once, German rifles snapped, trying to cut her down. Bullets hissed past. One struck her breast, tearing feathers. Another shattered her leg, the capsule hanging by shreds of flesh. She faltered, dipped, but then rose again, climbing higher, wings hammering against the pain. The men below craned their necks, watching her vanish into the mist. And then they waited. Seconds dragged into minutes. The artillery still fell, shells smashing closer, closer. Some soldiers dropped to their knees, covering their heads, whispering prayers. Others cursed. Whittlesey stood still, face grim, silent as stone. Then, at last, the thunder lifted. The shells moved further on, walking their destruction deeper into the forest. The men let out a ragged cheer. Cher Ami had made it. She had carried their plea through fire, through lead, through the very jaws of death, and she had saved them. But saving them from friendly fire didn't change their reality. They were still surrounded, starving, dying by inches. On the 4th night, hunger became something more than pain. It became delirium. Some men hallucinated, swearing they could smell bread baking, swearing they could hear the clatter of streetcars in New York. One soldier sat up suddenly, shouting that he saw his mother waiting with a meal, and before anyone could stop him, he stumbled into the open. A German bullet cut him down. He fell face first into the mud, hands outstretched as if still reaching for food. Others grew violent. One man accused another of hoarding biscuits, even though none had food left. They fought, fists swinging weakly, until comrades pulled them apart. Later, both men wept in silence, ashamed of their outburst but powerless to control it. Water was worse. Men licked leaves, scooped mud, even wrung sweat from their own shirts. Dysentery spread like wildfire. The ravine stank of human waste, its sound mingling with the moans of the wounded. Yet still they clung to life. That night, the Germans sent another message. A white flag appeared on the ridge. A voice, polite, almost gentle, called down, "Americans, you are surrounded. Lay down your arms. We will treat you well. You cannot hold out." The men looked to Whittlesey. What would he say? What would he do? He stood, mud dripping from his uniform, his glasses cracked, his face gaunt. He listened in silence as the messenger spoke. When the man finished, Whittlesey said nothing. He simply turned, walked back into the ravine, and sat down. His men understood. Silence was his answer. No surrender. Not now. Not ever. The German flag disappeared, the firing resumed, and the Lost Battalion braced themselves for another night in hell. By the 5th day, the ravine was no longer a position. It was a grave. The ground was churned to muck by shells, slick with blood, littered with bodies. The smell was suffocating. Rot, excrement, cordite. Buzzing flies clouded around the dead, landing on open wounds of the living. Rats ran bold across the trenches, gnawing at anything soft, flesh included. The men who could still stand looked like spectres, cheeks hollowed, lips cracked, and black with dried blood, eyes staring too wide. Some no longer spoke at all, just sat in silence, rifles clutched like talismans. Others muttered constantly, snatches of hymns, street songs, baseball scores, names of sweethearts back home. The forest pressed in on them, every shadow a threat, every rustle a possible attack. Hunger was no longer hunger, it was a clawing emptiness that made men tremble. Some chewed leaves or leather straps until their jaws bled. One soldier was seen scraping at the dirt with a stick, lifting handfuls of roots and worms. He swallowed them raw, gagging, but he didn't stop. Another man tore a button from his coat and sucked it as if it were candy. anything to quiet the body's demands. Thirst was worse. Water had run out days ago. Streams nearby were fouled with corpses, glowing with rainbow sheens of decay. Still, men crawled on their bellies to sip from them, retching afterward but returning again and again. Lips split and swelled. Some soldiers could barely whisper, their throats so raw they croaked like frogs. Others licked the condensation off helmets, anything to taste moisture. The wounded suffered most. Those who could not move were left lying where they fell. Some called out for comrades long dead. Others begged for bullets to end their pain. Their groans filled the night, echoing through the trees until they became part of the forest itself. On the morning of the 5th day, the Germans decided to end it. Waves of soldiers surged down the ridges, shouting, rifles flashing, bayonets lowered, grenades arced through the trees, thudding into the mud. For a moment it seemed the Lost Battalion must finally be overwhelmed, but Whittlesey's men rose. Thin, starving, hollow-eyed, they still had teeth. They fought like men possessed, hurling their last grenades, firing until rifles clicked empty, then swinging them like clubs. The ravine erupted into chaos, shouts in German and English, screams of the wounded, the wet sound of steel meeting flesh. Smoke filled the air, mud turned red, and somehow, impossibly, the Americans held. The Germans fell back, leaving their dead in heaps. The battalion staggered, but did not break. When the smoke cleared, they were still there, but victory brought no relief. Ammunition was nearly gone. Food was nothing but memory. Even hope seemed to have dried up, leaving only grim endurance. That night, the men lay in silence. Some stared at the sky, though the trees hid the stars. Others pressed faces into the mud, too weak to lift them. A few whispered prayers, voices cracked and thin. One soldier, delirious, sang softly to himself, an old lullaby his mother used to sing. The sound drifted through the ravine, sad and haunting, until it faded into nothing. By the 6th day, only about 200 men could still fight. The rest were wounded, unconscious or dead. Every hour felt like the last, and yet they endured. And then, sometime in the grey morning, came a new sound. Gunfire, but not aimed at them. Explosions, but further off, pushing closer through the forest. Shouts in English. The relief force was coming. At first, the survivors didn't believe it. After so many false hopes, so many nights of despair, it seemed impossible. But the sounds grew clearer. Branches snapped, boots pounded. And then, through the trees, they saw them, helmets they recognized, uniforms stained like their own, rifles carried at the ready. Relief. Some men laughed, a dry, cracked sound. Others wept openly, tears carving tracks down dirt-caked faces. A few simply collapsed where they stood, too weak to process what had happened. The rescuers moved among them, stunned by what they found. Men half buried in mud, eyes staring, others alive but skeletal, clutching rifles with trembling hands as if they would never let go. The ravine was a nightmare made flesh. When Whittlesey saw the relief force, he did not cheer, he did not smile, he simply nodded once, a small, tired gesture. His duty was done. His men were saved, or what was left of them. Out of the 550 who had marched into the Argonne, fewer than 200 staggered out under their own power. The rest were carried, dragged or left behind forever in the forest. As the survivors emerged from the trees, they looked less like victors than like phantoms, gaunt, broken, silent, but they had endured, and that endurance was enough to carve their place into legend. News of their ordeal spread quickly. Newspapers back home seized on the story. Americans, still adjusting to their nation's role in a European war, suddenly had a legend to rally around. The Lost Battalion became a symbol of grit, courage, and unyielding resolve. Whittlesey was hailed as a hero, though he resisted the title. When asked later about his decision not to surrender, he shrugged it off. He had simply followed his orders. For his men, those orders had meant the difference between honor and annihilation. Many of them were decorated for bravery. Whittlesey himself received the Medal of Honor, though he never seemed comfortable with the weight of it. Years later, haunted by the memories of that ravine, by the faces of those he could not save, he would take his own life. The war had spared his body but left wounds no medal could heal. Cher Ami, the battered pigeon who had carried their desperate message, was also honored. Surgeons saved her life, fitting her with a tiny wooden leg where the original had been shattered. She was awarded the Croix de Guerre by the French and returned to the United States, where she lived out her days as a celebrated veteran. Her body is preserved even now in the Smithsonian, a reminder that sometimes history turns on the wings of the smallest creatures. The legacy of the Lost Battalion stretched far beyond their 6 days in the Argonne. Their ordeal helped cement America's reputation as a fighting force that would not break, even under impossible conditions. It gave the public a story to cling to, a tale of ordinary men who endured extraordinary hardship and whose stubborn refusal to quit helped drive the Allies toward final victory. But it also left deeper lessons. That war, for all its banners and medals, is often decided by hunger, by thirst, by men clinging to life in mud and darkness. That heroism can look less like glory and more like simple endurance, and that sometimes survival itself is the most defiant victory of all. So the Lost Battalion marched into legend, but never into myth. Their story is not clean, it is not triumphant in the way stories often are. It is full of pain, of loss, of questions that never found answers, yet it endures because it is human. Because in the heart of that forest, stripped of all else, 500 men showed what it means to hold fast when everything else has fallen away. More than a century later, the Argonne is quiet again. Trees have grown back over the ravine. Birds sing where once shells fell, and if you walk there, you might not see any trace of the men who fought and died, but their story still hangs in the air, in the silence between the branches. The Lost Battalion may be gone, but their last stand still echoes, reminding us of the terrible cost of war and the stubborn endurance of those who refuse to be broken. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe to the channel.